Captain Jake Morrison stared out the viewport of the Earth transport ship as Zephyria Prime grew larger. The planet looked beautiful from space. Its purple oceans and silver continents sparkled under the light of twin suns. This was humanity's first real chance to make friends with a major alien empire. Jake wanted everything to go perfectly. "Coffee's ready, Captain," said Dr. Lisa Carter from behind him. She held 2 steaming cups in her hands. The smell filled the small bridge area. "Thanks, Lisa." Jake took the cup and drank deeply. The hot coffee helped calm his nerves. In 3 hours, they would meet the Veltari Empire's top diplomats. These aliens controlled dozens of star systems and had technology that made human ships look like toys. Lisa sat down next to him. She was the team's expert on alien life. Her job was to help Jake understand how the Veltari thought and acted. "Remember, they value strength above everything else," she said. "They respect power and control." Jake nodded. He had read all the reports. The Veltari were tall, thin creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. They had built their empire through conquest and smart politics. They were also very proud, maybe too proud. The ship's communication system buzzed. "Captain Morrison, we're getting a message from the planet," said the communications officer. "Put it through." A harsh voice filled the bridge. The translator made it sound mechanical. "Human vessel, you have permission to land at Diplomatic Station 7. Follow the approach path we are sending you. Do not deviate." "Understood," Jake replied. "We look forward to meeting with your representatives." There was a pause. Then the voice said, "We shall see if humans are worth our time." The connection ended. Jake and Lisa looked at each other. This was not starting well. 2 hours later, their shuttle touched down on a metal platform surrounded by tall spires. The Veltari architecture was impressive but cold. Everything was sharp angles and gleaming metal. There were no curves, no warmth, no signs of comfort anywhere. A group of Veltari waited for them. They stood perfectly still in a straight line. Their leader was taller than the others and wore a silver robe. His 4 arms were folded across his chest. Jake walked forward with Lisa beside him. Behind them came the rest of the human delegation. There were 5 humans total, carefully chosen to represent the best of Earth. "I am Ambassador Krixtal," the tall Veltari said. His voice was deep and cold. "You are the humans who wish to trade with the Empire." "That's correct," Jake said with a smile. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Lisa Carter, our specialist in interspecies relations. We're honored to meet you." Krixtal's large eyes studied them. His gaze stopped at the travel cups in their hands. "You carry containers. What do they contain?" "Coffee," Lisa answered. "It's a beverage we enjoy. Would you like to try some?" Several Veltari made sounds that the translator interpreted as laughter. It was not a pleasant sound. "We do not require chemical stimulants to function," Krixtal said. His tone suggested he thought they were stupid. "We are not weak like humans." Jake felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice steady. "Coffee is part of our culture. It helps us think clearly and socialize." "Exactly," Krixtal said. "You admit you cannot think clearly without drugs. You cannot socialize without chemical assistance. This confirms what we have heard about human weakness." The other Veltari made more laughing sounds. Jake saw Lisa's jaw tighten. She was getting angry too. They were led into a large meeting hall. The ceiling was high and the walls were decorated with images of Veltari victories. Everything was designed to make visitors feel small and unimportant. The humans sat on one side of a metal table. The Veltari sat on the other side. There were twice as many aliens as humans. "Let us discuss why you have come," Krixtal said. "You wish to trade your primitive goods for our advanced technology." "We prefer to think of it as mutual exchange," Jake said. "Earth has many resources that could benefit the Empire. Our agricultural products, for example, are quite diverse." "Agriculture," another Veltari said. His name was Sub-Commander Velcris. "You mean plants. We have analyzed your data. Most of your food crops are inefficient. You waste enormous amounts of land growing a plant that produces a mild stimulant. He was talking about coffee. Jake realized they had studied Earth's agricultural reports very carefully. Coffee is more than just a crop, Lisa said. It's central to human civilization. It brings people together. It helps us work and create and dream. Pathetic, Krickstall said. A species that requires drugs to dream is not worthy of Empire technology. The meeting went downhill from there. Every time the humans offered something, the Veltari found fault with it. They mocked human dependence on coffee. They laughed at human social customs. They called humans weak and primitive. By the end of the day, Jake felt exhausted and angry. The Veltari had refused every trade proposal. They had insulted humanity at every turn. Worst of all, they seemed to enjoy doing it. "We will consider your proposals," Krickstall said as the meeting ended. But his tone made it clear he would reject them all. As the humans walked back to their shuttle, Lisa noticed something odd. Several younger Veltari were following at a distance. When she looked at them directly, they turned away quickly. But she caught them staring at the coffee cups. "Jake," she said quietly, "I think some of them are curious about coffee." Jake looked back. The young Veltari were indeed watching them, their large eyes focused on the travel cups with obvious interest. "Maybe," Jake said, "but it doesn't matter. Their leaders have made their position clear. They think we're addicts and weaklings." On the flight back to Earth, Jake wrote his report. The mission was a failure. The Veltari wanted nothing to do with humanity. They viewed human dependence on coffee as proof of weakness and inferiority. But as he wrote, Jake kept thinking about those young Veltari. They had been curious despite their leader's contempt. Maybe there was another way to approach this problem. Lisa was thinking the same thing. She had noticed how the Veltari leaned forward when she described coffee's effects on human society. They pretended to be disgusted, but their body language suggested fascination. "They're interested," she told Jake. "They don't want to admit it, but they're very interested in coffee." "What are you thinking?" Jake asked. Lisa smiled. "Maybe we're approaching this wrong. Maybe instead of trying to convince their leaders, we should let coffee speak for itself." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous and possibly illegal." "Not illegal," Lisa said. "Just creative. What if we established a cultural exchange program? Small scale, unofficial. Let them discover coffee naturally." Jake thought about it. The direct approach had failed completely. Maybe it was time to try something more subtle. "It's worth considering," he said finally. "But we'd need the right people for a job like that." Lisa was already making plans in her head. The Veltari thought they were superior to humans. They were proud and arrogant and dismissive. But pride comes before a fall. And sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to give them exactly what they claim they don't want. Amy Rodriguez stepped off the transport shuttle and breathed in the thin air of Zephyria Prime. 6 months had passed since Captain Morrison's failed diplomatic mission. Now it was her turn to try a different approach. Unlike Morrison's formal delegation, Amy came with just 3 other humans. Their mission was simple on paper. They would establish a small cultural exchange outpost. They would study Veltari society and share human culture in return. No trade negotiations, no formal diplomacy, just friendly cultural exchange. "The air feels strange," said Carl Peterson, the team botanist. He carried several cases of sealed containers. Inside were various earth plants, including carefully selected coffee seedlings. "You'll get used to it," Amy replied. She had spent weeks preparing for this mission. She knew exactly what she wanted to accomplish, but she had to be very careful about how she did it. Lieutenant Ben Sullivan looked around the landing pad. Several Veltari watched them from a distance, but none approached. "Friendly bunch," he said with a slight smile. Dr. Karen White adjusted her equipment pack. As the team's psychologist, her job was to study Veltari behavior and help the team understand alien thinking patterns. "Remember, we're here to learn and share. Nothing more." The humans were escorted to a small building on the outskirts of the main city. It was much smaller than the impressive diplomatic center where Morrison had met with Ambassador Crixtel, but that was exactly what Amy wanted. Smaller meant more personal. More personal meant more opportunities. Their guide was a young Veltari named Junior Administrator Veltar. He was shorter than most of his kind and seemed nervous about his assignment. "You will live here," Veltar said, gesturing to the simple building. "You may use the common areas for your cultural activities. Do not disturb other residents." "Of course," Amy said with a warm smile. "We're just happy to be here. We hope to learn a lot about your fascinating culture." Veltar looked surprised by her friendly tone. Most humans he had heard about were either aggressive or submissive. Amy was neither. She seemed genuinely interested in learning. Over the next few days, the humans settled into their new home. Carl set up a small greenhouse area where he began growing various earth plants. The coffee plants were mixed in with herbs, vegetables, and flowers. To casual observers, they looked like a random collection of alien vegetation. Amy established regular schedules for cultural activities. Every morning at the same time, she would brew fresh coffee in the common area. The rich aroma would fill the building as other residents, mostly young Veltari bureaucrats, went about their morning routines. At first, the Veltari avoided the humans completely. They would hurry past the common area without making eye contact. But Amy noticed they were taking longer routes to avoid passing through quickly. They were slowing down to smell the air. "The coffee plants are doing well," Carl reported after the first week. "The soil composition here is actually quite good for them, and I think some of the Veltari have been looking at the greenhouse." "Really?" Amy asked. She was preparing her morning coffee as usual. The grinding of the beans made a pleasant sound that seemed to carry throughout the building. "Yeah, I've caught a few peeking through the windows. They seem curious about all the plants, but they stare longest at the coffee plants." Ben was reading reports on his datapad. "I've been monitoring local communications. There's been some chatter about the strange human rituals happening in this building. Apparently word is spreading about our morning coffee routine." Karen looked up from her notes. "I've observed several Veltari altering their daily schedules to pass through the common area during coffee preparation time. They claim they're taking shortcuts, but the routes they're using are actually longer than their usual paths." Amy smiled as she poured hot water over the ground coffee beans. The smell was incredible, rich and inviting. She had chosen this particular blend very carefully. It was strong enough to be aromatic, but not so strong as to be overwhelming to alien senses. "Good morning," a voice said behind her. Amy turned to see Veltar standing in the doorway. This was the first time any Veltari had voluntarily approached during coffee preparation. "Good morning," Amy replied cheerfully. "How are you today?" Veltar hesitated. "I am well. I was wondering, what is that substance you prepare each morning?" "This? It's called coffee. It's a beverage we make from roasted plant seeds." Amy held up the steaming cup. "It's part of our morning routine. Would you like to try some?" Veltar took a step backward. "No, I was merely curious about the smell. It is quite strong." "Yes, it has a distinctive aroma," Amy agreed. "Some people find it pleasant. Others need time to appreciate it. And you consume this every morning?" "Most humans do. It helps us wake up and think clearly. But more than that, it's a social activity. We share coffee with friends and colleagues. It brings people together." Veltar's large eyes studied the coffee cup carefully. "You believe this plant extract makes you think more clearly?" "Well, it does contain a mild stimulant called caffeine, but honestly, a lot of the benefit comes from the ritual itself. Taking time each morning to prepare something carefully, to enjoy a moment of peace before the day begins. It's meditative." This was not what Veltar had expected to hear. He had been told that humans were addicted to coffee, that they could not function without it. But Amy made it sound like a choice, a pleasant tradition rather than a desperate need. "I see," he said finally. "It is cultural." "Exactly. Every culture has its rituals and traditions. I'd love to learn about Veltari morning customs." Over the following weeks, Veltar began stopping by the common area more frequently. At first, he claimed he was checking on the humans' activities for his official reports, but gradually, he began asking more questions about coffee and human culture. Other, young Veltari started joining him. They would gather in small groups, pretending to discuss official business while secretly listening to Amy's explanations of human customs. The coffee aroma seemed to draw them like a magnet. Carl noticed increased traffic around his greenhouse. "They're definitely interested in the plants," he told Amy. "Yesterday I caught one of them trying to touch a coffee plant through the glass." "Perfect," Amy said. She was preparing an extra large batch of coffee that morning. The smell was stronger than usual. "I think it's time to be a little more generous with our cultural sharing." When Veltar arrived with his usual group of curious colleagues, Amy greeted them with several cups of freshly brewed coffee. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "I made extra coffee today. Since you've all shown such interest in human culture, I thought you might like to try it. For educational purposes, of course." The Veltari looked at each other uncertainly. They had been taught that coffee was a human weakness, a sign of addiction and dependency. But they were also naturally curious beings, and the smell was incredibly appealing. "Is it safe for Veltari to consume?" asked one of the younger aliens. "As far as we know," Amy replied. "Our medical scans suggest Veltari physiology should handle caffeine just fine, but you don't have to try it if you're uncomfortable." Veltar stepped forward first. "I will test it, for scientific purposes." He took a small sip of the coffee. His eyes widened slightly. Then he took another sip. And another. "It is warm," he said carefully, "and the taste is complex." "How do you feel?" Karen asked, genuinely curious about the psychological effects. "Alert," Veltar said with surprise. "More alert than usual. And focused." Within minutes, the other Veltari had tried the coffee as well. They stood in the common area, sipping from human cups, discussing the strange new experience with obvious fascination. Amy watched them carefully. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The first step was complete. The Veltari had tasted coffee and liked it. Now came the harder part. She had to make sure they would want it again. Veltar arrived at the human outpost earlier than usual. It had been 3 days since he first tasted coffee, and he found himself thinking about it constantly. The warm, bitter taste lingered in his memory. More importantly, he remembered how sharp and focused his mind had felt afterward. "Good morning, Veltar," Amy said as he entered the common area. She was preparing coffee as always, but today she seemed to be taking extra care with the process. "Good morning," Veltar replied. He tried to sound casual, but his eyes were fixed on the coffee preparation. "I was wondering if I could try that beverage again. For further research purposes, of course." Amy smiled. "Of course. I'm always happy to share human culture." She handed him a steaming cup. Veltar took his first sip and felt the familiar surge of mental clarity. His thoughts became sharper, his awareness more acute. It was a remarkable sensation. "This is fascinating," he said, taking another sip. "The effect is quite pronounced. I completed twice as much work yesterday afternoon as I normally would." "Really?" Amy asked with interest. "That's wonderful. Coffee affects different people in different ways." Over the next hour, Veltar drank the entire cup while discussing various topics with Amy. He found himself more articulate than usual, his thoughts flowing smoothly from one idea to the next. When he finally left for his official duties, he felt energized and confident. His supervisor, Senior Administrator Kethron, noticed the change immediately. "Veltar, your productivity reports from yesterday were exceptional," Kethron said during their morning briefing. "What accounts for this improvement?" Veltar hesitated. He didn't want to admit he had been consuming human substances. "I have been optimizing my work methods." "Excellent. Continue this optimization. The Empire rewards efficiency." That afternoon, Veltar found himself craving another cup of coffee. The memory of its taste and effects called to him. He told himself it was purely scientific interest, but deep down he knew it was more than that. He returned to the human outpost after his work shift ended. Amy was in the greenhouse with Carl, examining the coffee plants. "Veltar," Amy said cheerfully. "How was your day?" "Very productive," he admitted. "I was wondering, could I perhaps try more of that coffee? I want to study its effects more thoroughly." "Of course," Amy said. But then she frowned slightly. "Unfortunately, I've already used up today's batch. Coffee takes time to prepare properly, you know. I'll have fresh coffee available tomorrow morning." Veltar felt a sharp pang of disappointment. He had been looking forward to that warm, energizing drink all afternoon. "I see. Perhaps you could teach me how to prepare it myself." Amy and Carl exchanged glances. "Well," Amy said slowly, "it's quite complicated. You need the right equipment, the right temperature, the correct timing, and of course you need properly roasted coffee beans." "I could obtain whatever equipment is necessary," Veltar said eagerly. "The beans are the real problem," Carl added. "They have to be grown in very specific conditions, then roasted to exactly the right degree. Too little roasting and the coffee is weak and sour. Too much roasting and it becomes bitter and burnt. It takes years to learn the proper technique." Veltar stared at the coffee plants in the greenhouse. They looked simple enough, just green shrubs with small berries. How difficult could it be? "Could I perhaps take some of these plants to study?" he asked. Carl shook his head. "These are still young seedlings. They won't produce berries for at least a year, maybe 2. And even then, you'd need to know how to process the berries, extract the beans, dry them properly, store them correctly. It's really quite complex," Amy agreed. "Coffee is one of those things that looks simple but requires a lot of knowledge and experience." That night, Veltar lay in his sleeping chamber thinking about coffee. His mind felt sluggish compared to how sharp it had been that morning. His work that afternoon had been adequate, but not exceptional like it had been the day before. He began visiting the human outpost every morning. Amy always welcomed him with a fresh cup of coffee, and they would talk about human culture while he drank. Veltar found these conversations fascinating. The coffee seemed to make him more curious, more interested in new ideas. Word of Veltar's regular visits spread among the other young Veltari in the administrative building. Soon, several of his colleagues began joining him for morning coffee sessions. "The taste is quite unusual," said junior analyst Zekris after his first cup. "But the mental effects are remarkable. I solved a complex scheduling problem this morning that had been puzzling me for weeks." "Yes," agreed assistant coordinator Nixtal. "I feel more creative after drinking this, more willing to try new approaches to old problems." Dr. Karen White observed these interactions carefully, taking notes on Veltari behavior patterns. The aliens were clearly developing positive associations with coffee consumption. They arrived earlier each morning, stayed longer, and showed visible disappointment when the coffee was finished. "They're forming dependencies," she reported to Amy privately. "Classic addiction patterns. They're building tolerance, showing withdrawal symptoms, and organizing their daily schedules around coffee consumption." "Just like humans," Amy replied with a slight smile. Meanwhile, Veltar was growing frustrated with his inability to replicate the coffee experience on his own. He had tried brewing various plant materials in hot water, but nothing produced the desired effects. He had even attempted to steal a coffee bean from the greenhouse, but Carl had caught him before he could take it. "The security around those plants is quite strict," he complained to Amy one morning. "Are they really so valuable?" "To humans, yes," Amy replied. "Good coffee is precious to us. We don't share it lightly." This only made Veltar want it more. He began offering small favors to the humans in exchange for extra cups of coffee. He would share interesting information about Veltari politics, help them navigate bureaucratic procedures, or provide access to restricted areas of the city. "I could arrange for you to visit the Imperial Archives," he offered one morning. "In exchange for perhaps an extra cup of coffee?" Amy pretended to consider this carefully. "Well, that would be very valuable for our cultural research. I suppose I could make an exception." Other Veltari began making similar offers. Junior officials started trading information, access, and minor official favors for coffee. The humans were gaining unprecedented insight into Veltari society and government operations. Senior Administrator Kethron noticed the dramatic improvement in his subordinates' work quality. Productivity in his department had increased by 30% over the past month. Reports were more detailed, analyses were more thorough, and creative solutions to problems were becoming commonplace. What has caused this remarkable improvement? He asked Veltar during a private meeting. Veltar shifted uncomfortably. He couldn't admit that he and his colleagues were consuming human substances. That would be seen as weakness, possibly even treason. We have been studying human work methods, he said carefully. Their approaches to problem-solving are quite interesting. Interesting enough to produce these results? Perhaps I should investigate these methods myself. Veltar felt a moment of panic. If Kethron discovered the coffee sessions, they might be banned. Worse, the humans might be expelled from the planet. The methods are quite complex, he said quickly. They require extensive preparation and special materials that are difficult to obtain. Kethron studied him carefully. You seem different lately, Veltar. More alert, more confident. What exactly are these human methods? Before Veltar could answer, his communication device chimed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and felt his heart sink. The message was from Amy. No coffee available today due to equipment malfunction, sorry. Veltar excused himself from Kethran's office and hurried to the human outpost. He found several other Veltari already there, all looking disappointed and anxious. When will the equipment be repaired? Asked Zekris. I'm not sure, Amy replied with genuine regret. It could be several days, maybe a week. The Veltari looked at each other with barely concealed panic. A week without coffee? Already Veltar could feel his mental sharpness beginning to fade. His thoughts felt slower, heavier. The prospect of returning to his previous mental state was deeply disturbing. Perhaps we could help repair the equipment, Nixtal suggested, desperately. Amy shook her head. It requires specialized knowledge and replacement parts from Earth. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do but wait. As the Veltari walked away from the outpost, dejected and anxious, Amy watched them go with satisfaction. The hook was set. Now it was time to reel them in. The coffee shortage lasted exactly 5 days. For Veltar and his colleagues, it felt like 5 years. By the second day without coffee, Veltar's work performance had dropped noticeably. His thoughts felt sluggish and unclear. Tasks that had been simple while drinking coffee now seemed complicated and frustrating. He made errors he would never have made before. Are you ill? Senior Administrator Kethron asked during their morning briefing. Your recent reports lack their usual quality. I am fine, Veltar lied. But he wasn't fine. None of the regular coffee drinkers were fine. They moved through their duties like sleepwalkers, constantly thinking about that warm, energizing beverage they could no longer access. On the 5th day, Amy announced that the coffee equipment had been repaired. Word spread through the administrative building like wildfire. By the time the morning coffee session began, nearly 20 young Veltari had gathered in the small common area. I've missed this so much, Zekris admitted, as he took his first sip in days. The relief on his face was obvious to everyone. The clarity, whispered Nixtal, closing her eyes as the caffeine took effect. I had forgotten how good it feels to think clearly. Amy watched the scene with careful interest. The Veltari were displaying classic addiction recovery behavior. The relief, the gratitude, the renewed appreciation for something they had been taking for granted. But 20 Veltari was too many for the small outpost to handle regularly. Amy had been expecting this problem. I'm sorry, she announced after everyone had finished their coffee. But I don't think I can provide coffee for this many people every day. My supplies are limited and brewing takes a long time. A wave of panic swept through the group. They had just gotten their coffee back, and now it might be taken away again. What? If we helped with the preparation? Veltar suggested quickly. Or brought our own cups, added another. Or contributed resources for supplies, offered a third. Amy pretended to think about this. Well, I suppose if there was enough interest, we could establish a proper coffee service, but it would need to be official, and it would need funding. Within hours, Veltar had submitted a formal request to his superiors for the establishment of a human cultural beverage study program. He presented it as important research into human social customs that could provide valuable intelligence about Earth's dominant species. Senior Administrator Kethron was puzzled but intrigued. This beverage has such significance to human culture? Enormous significance, Veltar assured him. They consume it daily. Their entire society is organized around its consumption. Understanding. It could give us crucial insights into human weakness. The request was approved along with a modest budget for cultural research. Veltar immediately contacted Amy with the good news. Wonderful, Amy said with a smile. I'll need to bring in some additional equipment and supplies from Earth, and probably another person to help with preparation. A week later, a new transport arrived at Zephyria Prime. Among the passengers was Tony Martinez, a skilled coffee roaster and barista from Earth. He brought with him industrial-grade coffee-making equipment and several tons of green coffee beans. This is quite an operation you've got going here, Tony said as he surveyed the expanded workspace Amy had prepared. How many aliens are we serving? About 30 regular customers so far, Amy replied. But I expect that number to grow quickly. She was right. Word of the improved coffee service spread throughout the administrative district. Veltari, who had never heard of coffee, began stopping by out of curiosity. Those who tried it once invariably returned for more. The effects on Veltari society were dramatic and swift. Coffee consumption began altering daily schedules across the planet. Government offices started their day later to allow time for morning coffee. Work breaks were rescheduled around coffee preparation times. Social gatherings increasingly centered on coffee consumption. Commander Steve Hughes arrived from Earth to observe the situation. As a military intelligence officer, his job was to assess the strategic implications of what was happening on Zephyria Prime. It's remarkable, he reported back to Earth Command. An entire alien civilization is restructuring itself around a human agricultural product. Their productivity has increased dramatically, but they've also become completely dependent on our coffee supply. The dependency was real and growing stronger every day. Veltari, who had been drinking coffee for months, could no longer function effectively without it. Their brains had adapted to regular caffeine intake, and withdrawal caused headaches, fatigue, and severe mental fog. But rather than see this as a problem, most Veltari viewed coffee as a miraculous enhancement to their natural abilities. They began incorporating it into their cultural practices and social rituals. Coffee houses run by humans started appearing in major Veltari cities. These weren't simple beverage stands, but sophisticated social centers where Veltari gathered to drink coffee, conduct business, and share ideas. The atmosphere in these establishments was unlike anything in traditional Veltari society. Coffee seemed to make the normally formal and rigid aliens more relaxed and creative. The social changes are as significant as the physiological ones, doctors say. Karen White noted in her reports. Coffee consumption is breaking down traditional hierarchical barriers. Junior officials are having casual conversations with senior administrators. New ideas are being shared more freely. Their entire social structure is becoming more flexible. The Veltari government noticed these changes, but interpreted them positively. Productivity was up across all sectors. Innovation was increasing. Interdepartment cooperation had improved dramatically. From their perspective, human coffee was making their society better and stronger. Ambassador Crixtel, who had so rudely dismissed human coffee addiction months earlier, found himself facing a dilemma. His own staff were now regular coffee drinkers. His department's performance had improved significantly since they began consuming the human beverage. But his pride prevented him from admitting that humans had provided something valuable to Veltari society. It is merely a tool, he told his subordinates when they praised coffee's effects. We are using human weakness for our own purposes. But privately, Crixtal was beginning to understand that coffee was not a sign of human weakness. It was a source of human strength. The aliens who had mocked human addiction were now displaying the same patterns of dependence and desire. The irony was not lost on some of the more thoughtful Veltari observers. Junior philosopher Extor wrote a controversial essay titled The Mirror of Addiction, in which he argued that the Veltari had criticized humans for a behavior they themselves had quickly adopted when given the opportunity. Perhaps, he wrote, what we interpreted as weakness was actually wisdom. Humans discovered a natural substance that enhances cognitive function and social cooperation. They integrated it into their culture not out of weakness, but out of intelligence. The essay caused quite a stir in Veltari intellectual circles. Many older, more traditional Veltari rejected its conclusions. But among the younger generation, especially those who had experienced coffee's benefits firsthand, it rang true. Meanwhile, Tony Martinez was working overtime to keep up with demand. "We need more equipment," he told Amy, "and a lot more coffee beans. I've got requests for coffee service from 6 different cities now." "How much coffee would we need to supply the entire planet?" Amy asked. Tony did some quick calculations. "If every adult Veltari drinks 2 cups a day, we're talking about millions of pounds of coffee annually. Earth's entire production wouldn't be enough." Amy smiled. This was exactly what she had hoped to hear. The Veltari were becoming dependent on something only Earth could provide in sufficient quantities. But the Veltari weren't stupid. They could see their growing dependence, and some of them were beginning to worry about it. "We need to develop our own coffee production," Senior Administrator Kethron announced during a high-level government meeting. "This dependence on human supplies is strategically dangerous." Attempts to grow coffee on Zephyria Prime began immediately. The government assigned their best agricultural scientists to the project. They obtained coffee plants from the human greenhouse and tried to cultivate them in various locations across the planet. Every attempt failed miserably. The coffee plants either died quickly or produced beans that, when processed, created a bitter, unpalatable liquid, nothing like the smooth, energizing coffee the Veltari had grown to love. "The soil composition is wrong," reported Chief Agricultural Scientist Vexmar. "The climate is not suitable. The processing techniques are extremely complex. Without human expertise, we cannot replicate their coffee." This news sent shockwaves through the Veltari government. They had become dependent on something they could not produce themselves. Their enhanced productivity, their improved social cooperation, their increased innovation, all of it relied on continued access to human coffee. For the first time since contact with humanity began, the Veltari found themselves in a position of weakness. They needed something from humans more than humans needed anything from them, and the humans knew it. 2 years had passed since Amy Rodriguez first brewed coffee on Zephyria Prime. The small cultural exchange outpost had grown into a massive operation spanning multiple continents. Coffee had become as essential to Veltari society as breathing. Captain Alex Turner commanded the fleet of cargo ships that now made regular runs between Earth and Zephyria Prime. His holds were filled with tons of roasted coffee beans, specialized brewing equipment, and human technical experts. The coffee trade had become one of humanity's most profitable ventures. "Cargo Bay 7 is loaded with premium blend for the capital city," reported his first officer. "Cargo Bay 8 has the mild roast for the northern provinces, and we've got 3 new coffee specialists in passenger quarters." Alex nodded as he reviewed the manifest. Each shipment was carefully planned and timed. The humans had learned to manage Veltari coffee supplies like a precious strategic resource, because that's exactly what it had become. On Zephyria Prime, Ambassador Nancy Foster was preparing for the most important trade negotiations in human history. Unlike Captain Morrison's failed mission 2 years earlier, she was negotiating from a position of incredible strength. The Veltari delegation sat across from her in the same meeting hall where humans had once been mocked and dismissed. But the Adorier atmosphere was completely different now. The Veltari representatives all had coffee cups at their places. The rich aroma filled the room, and several aliens were visibly more relaxed and alert after drinking. "Ambassador Foster," said Senior Trade Coordinator Bexutel, "we are prepared to offer significant concessions in exchange for guaranteed coffee supplies." Nancy smiled politely. "I'm listening." What followed was the most comprehensive trade agreement in galactic history. The Veltari offered advanced technology, military protection, favorable mining rights, and access to their extensive trade networks. In exchange, they wanted just one thing: a steady, reliable supply of Earth coffee. Our productivity depends on it, Bextal explained, somewhat embarrassed. Our society has adapted around coffee consumption. Without it, our efficiency would drop by 40% or more. Nancy had read the reports. She knew the Veltari were being conservative with that estimate. Some sectors of their economy would collapse entirely without coffee. Government workers, scientists, engineers, teachers, all of them had become dependent on caffeine to function at their new, higher levels of performance. Of course, we want to help our friends on Zephyria Prime, Nancy said carefully. But Earth's coffee production is limited. We'll need significant compensation to dedicate so much of our agricultural output to export. The negotiations continued for days. Every morning began with an elaborate coffee service that the Veltari had insisted upon. They couldn't focus properly without their caffeine fix, and they knew it. Meanwhile, on Earth, coffee production was being rapidly expanded to meet growing demand. Entire planets were being terraformed specifically for coffee cultivation. The profits from the Veltari trade were so enormous that humanity could afford massive agricultural projects. We're talking about industrial-scale farming operations, reported Agricultural Minister Janet Wells during a government briefing. 3 new worlds dedicated entirely to coffee production. It will triple our output within 5 years, President T. Robert Hayes smiled as he reviewed the projections. And all of it protected by the most powerful military in the galaxy, thanks to our new Veltari allies. That was the beautiful irony of the situation. The Veltari Empire had been forced to offer military protection to Earth in order to secure their coffee supplies. The species that had once considered humans weak and primitive was now sworn to defend humanity against any threat. Back on Zephyria Prime, the failed coffee cultivation projects had become a source of national embarrassment. Billions of credits had been spent trying to develop independent coffee production. Every attempt had ended in failure. The humans have centuries of experience with coffee cultivation, admitted Dr. Lexfar, the lead agricultural researcher. They understand soil conditions, climate requirements, processing techniques, and quality control in ways we cannot replicate quickly. Even when the Veltari managed to grow coffee plants successfully, the resulting beverage was terrible. It was bitter, weak, or had strange flavors that made it undrinkable. The Veltari had become connoisseurs of good coffee, and they could immediately tell the difference between proper Earth coffee and their own inferior attempts. It's not just agriculture, explained human coffee expert Maria Santos to a group of Veltari scientists. Coffee quality depends on hundreds of factors: the variety of plant, the altitude where it's grown, the amount of rainfall, the timing of harvest, the method of processing, the roasting temperature and duration, the grinding technique, the water quality used for brewing, even the type of equipment used for preparation. The Veltari listened with growing dismay. They had assumed coffee was simple, just a plant that produced beans. They hadn't realized it was one of the most complex agricultural products in human civilization. On Earth, we have coffee experts who spend decades learning their craft, Maria continued. Master roasters who can tell the difference between beans, grown on different sides of the same mountain. Coffee sommeliers who can identify the exact variety and origin of a coffee just by tasting it. This knowledge took our species centuries to develop. The implications were clear. Even if the Veltari could eventually learn to grow decent coffee, it would take generations to match human expertise. And by then, their society would be so dependent on coffee that any interruption in supply would cause economic and social collapse. Some Veltari leaders had begun to understand the trap they had walked into. Ambassador Crixtel, the same alien who had mocked human coffee addiction, now found himself drinking 4 cups a day just to function normally. We have made a strategic error, he admitted privately to his closest advisors. We allowed ourselves to become dependent on human supplies. What choice did we have? Replied his deputy, Sub-Commander Velkris. The productivity gains were enormous. Our entire economy has benefited from coffee consumption. That was true. The Veltari Empire was more prosperous and innovative than it had ever been. Coffee-fueled workers had designed new technologies, discovered more efficient production methods, and created artistic works of unprecedented beauty. Their society had flourished under the influence of caffeine. But prosperity had come with a price. They were no longer truly independent. If the humans cut off our coffee supply, our civilization would face serious problems, Krixtal said grimly. We have given them enormous power over us. The humans, of course, had no intention of cutting off coffee supplies. The trade was far too profitable, and the political benefits were too valuable. But the Veltari didn't know that. From their perspective, they were completely vulnerable to human economic pressure. This fear led to increasingly generous offers from the Veltari government. They provided Earth with advanced weapons technology, shared intelligence about other alien species, and offered to serve as humanity's protectors in galactic politics. It's remarkable, observed Commander Steve Hughes during one of his regular reports to Earth. The Veltari are essentially paying us to let them remain addicted to our coffee. They're giving us technology worth trillions of credits in exchange for agricultural products. The arrangement suited humanity perfectly. Earth gained advanced technology, military protection, and enormous profits, all in exchange for coffee, something humans had been drinking for centuries anyway. But the most satisfying aspect was the complete reversal of roles. The aliens who had mocked human addiction were now displaying the same dependency, only worse. Veltari society had adapted around coffee consumption in ways that made them more dependent than humans had ever been. Human coffee consumption was cultural and habitual. Veltari coffee consumption had become physiological and economic. Without coffee, human society would be less pleasant and less efficient. Without coffee, Veltari society would face genuine crisis. They've become more addicted than we ever were, Amy Rodriguez noted with satisfaction. She had been promoted to Director of Interspecies Cultural Exchange and was now overseeing coffee operations across multiple alien worlds. And they still don't understand how it happened, added Dr. Karen White. They think they're making rational choices based on productivity improvements. They don't realize they've been manipulated. The manipulation had been subtle but effective. By presenting coffee as a cultural curiosity rather than a trade good, the humans had bypassed Veltari suspicions. By allowing the aliens to discover coffee's benefits for themselves, they had avoided triggering defensive reactions. And by carefully controlling supply and quality, they had created dependency without appearing threatening. It was, in many ways, the perfect conquest. The Veltari had been defeated not through military force or political pressure, but through simple desire for a better life. They had voluntarily surrendered their independence for the promise of enhanced performance and social cooperation, and the most beautiful part was that they were happier for it. Coffee had genuinely improved Veltari society in many ways. They were more productive, more creative, and more socially connected than they had ever been before. They just weren't free anymore. 5 years after Captain Jake Morrison's humiliating diplomatic failure, Admiral Ryan Brooks sat in the same meeting hall on Zephyria Prime. But everything had changed. The walls were now decorated with images celebrating human Veltari friendship. Coffee stations had been installed in every corner. The air was filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Across from him sat Ambassador Krixtal, the same alien who had once mocked human addiction. The proud Veltari diplomat now held a large coffee cup with both hands, his third cup of the morning. His addiction was obvious to everyone in the room, but no one spoke of it directly. Admiral Brooks, Krixtal said, his voice warm and respectful, the Empire is honored to formalize our alliance with humanity. The treaty document spread across the table represented the most complete diplomatic victory in human history. The Veltari Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, was offering humanity everything they had once refused to consider: military protection, advanced technology, favorable trade agreements, access to their vast network of allied species, all in exchange for coffee. The terms are quite generous, Admiral Brooks said, reviewing the documents while sipping his own coffee. He was enjoying the irony immensely. Coffee has brought great prosperity to our people, Krixtal admitted. Our productivity has increased dramatically. Our scientists have made breakthrough discoveries. Our artists have created works of unprecedented beauty. We owe much to human agricultural expertise. Admiral Brooks nodded thoughtfully. He had read Dr. Michelle Parker's latest research reports. Her studies of caffeine's effects on Veltari physiology had revealed fascinating details about their addiction. Unlike humans, who could function reasonably well without coffee, the Veltari had experienced fundamental changes in their brain chemistry. Their neurons had adapted to constant caffeine stimulation. Withdrawal would cause not just discomfort, but serious cognitive impairment that could last for months. Your society has certainly flourished, Admiral Brooks agreed. We're proud to have contributed to Veltari's success. The signing ceremony was broadcast across both civilizations. On Earth, humans watched with satisfaction as their former enemies signed documents that made them permanent allies. On Zephyria Prime, the Veltari celebrated what they saw as a partnership between equals. Neither side mentioned the real reason for the alliance. Everyone understood, but no one spoke of it openly. After the ceremony, Admiral Brooks walked through the capital city of Zephyria Prime. Coffee shops lined every street, each one filled with Veltari customers. The aliens sat in small groups, drinking coffee and discussing business, politics, and art. The atmosphere was lively and creative, completely different from the cold formality that had characterized Veltari society before coffee's arrival. It's remarkable how much they've changed, observed Dr. Michelle Parker, who walked beside him. Coffee hasn't just made them dependent on us, it's made them more like us. That was true. Veltari society had become warmer, more social, and more innovative. Coffee breaks had replaced formal meetings as the preferred way to conduct business. Casual conversations over coffee had become more important than official reports. The rigid hierarchy that once dominated Veltari culture had softened into something more flexible and cooperative. They're happier, Michelle continued. More fulfilled. In many ways, addiction has improved their quality of life. Admiral Brooks paused outside a coffee shop to watch the customers inside. Young and old Veltari sat together, sharing drinks and conversation. Their body language was relaxed and friendly. They laughed frequently, something that had been rare in traditional Veltari society. Addiction, he mused. Such an interesting word. They accused us of being addicts. Now look at them. Through the window, he could see Ambassador Krixtal at a corner table, drinking coffee with several junior diplomats. The senior official was listening carefully to their ideas, nodding and asking questions. Before coffee, such informal interaction between ranks would have been unthinkable. The difference is that we chose our addiction, Admiral Brooks said. They fell into theirs accidentally, and now they can't escape it. Dr. Parker had been studying this phenomenon extensively. Withdrawal would be catastrophic for them. Their government estimates that ending coffee consumption would reduce productivity by 60%. Their economy would collapse. Their social structures would revert to the old rigid patterns. They would lose everything they've gained. And they know this? At some level, yes. The smart ones understand their situation perfectly. But they've decided the benefits outweigh the risks. Admiral Brooks smiled. A rational choice, then. Absolutely. They're trapped, but it's a comfortable trap, like a golden cage. As they continued walking, they passed construction sites where new coffee processing facilities were being built. Veltari workers labored alongside human supervisors, learning the complex techniques of coffee production. But even after years of training, the Veltari-produced coffee remained inferior to Earth imports. Will they ever achieve independence? Admiral Brooks asked. Michelle shook her head. Not in our lifetime. Maybe not ever. Coffee cultivation is as much art as science. Earth has perfect growing conditions, centuries of experience, and genetic varieties of coffee plants that took generations to develop. The Veltari would need decades just to match our current quality, and by then we'll have advanced even further. They reached the human embassy, a gleaming building at the heart of the city. The lobby featured an elaborate coffee bar staffed by human baristas. Veltari officials waited in line alongside human diplomats, all seeking the same thing: perfectly prepared coffee. Admiral Brooks's personal aide approached with the day's intelligence reports. "Sir, we've received inquiries from 12 other alien species about establishing coffee trade agreements. Word is spreading about the Veltari's success." 12 species? Admiral Brooks raised an eyebrow. "The Zexkari Federation is particularly interested. Their ambassador has requested a cultural exchange program similar to the one we established here." Admiral Brooks thought about this development. If other alien civilizations wanted coffee, humanity could extend its influence across the galaxy. Each species that became dependent on coffee would become a potential ally and trading partner. "Prepare a proposal for expanded cultural exchange programs," he ordered. "But be subtle about it. Let them think they're discovering coffee on their own." "Yes, sir." "Should we use the same approach that worked here?" "Exactly the same. Small outposts, friendly cultural exchange, let them taste coffee voluntarily. Never push, never pressure. Let curiosity and addiction do the work for us." That evening, Admiral Brooks attended a reception at the Veltari government building. The event was held in honor of the new alliance, but it was also a typical example of how coffee had transformed Veltari social customs. Instead of formal speeches and rigid protocols, the reception featured casual conversation areas where humans and Veltari mingled freely. Coffee stations were placed throughout the room, and the constant flow of caffeine kept the atmosphere lively and relaxed. Ambassador Krixtal approached with his 4th cup of coffee of the evening. His eyes were bright and alert, his manner friendly and approachable. The transformation from the cold, arrogant diplomat of 5 years ago was complete. "Admiral Brooks," Krixtal said warmly, "I wanted to thank you personally for everything humanity has given us. Coffee has transformed our civilization for the better. We're happy to help," Admiral Brooks replied diplomatically. "Friendship between our species benefits everyone." "Indeed. And I hope you know that the Empire will honor our commitments completely. Your people will always have our protection and support." Admiral Brooks nodded graciously. He was well aware that the Veltari now had little choice but to honor their commitments. Their coffee dependency made them reliable allies in a way that treaties and agreements alone never could. Later that night, as Admiral Brooks prepared his final reports to Earth, he reflected on the remarkable turn of events. Humanity had gone from rejected supplicants to dominant partners in less than 5 years. They had achieved this transformation not through military conquest or technological superiority, but through a simple plant that grew in Earth's soil. The species that had mocked human addiction was now more addicted than humans had ever been. The empire that had refused to trade with drug-dependent primitives now organized its entire society around the consumption of that same drug. It was, Admiral Brooks realized, the perfect revenge. Not destructive or cruel, but transformative and ironic. The Veltari had been conquered by their own desires, trapped by their own pursuit of improvement, and the most beautiful part was that they were grateful for it. As he wrote his report, Admiral Brooks could smell coffee brewing in the embassy kitchen. The night staff was preparing for the morning shift, when hundreds of Veltari officials would arrive for their daily caffeine fix. Tomorrow would bring new negotiations, new agreements, and new opportunities for human expansion. And it would all begin, as every day now began on Zephyria Prime, with coffee. The galaxy's most powerful military empire had become humanity's protector and ally, all because they had learned to crave what humans had been drinking for centuries: